This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. Hi, everyone. This is Brian Mitchell. I just want to introduce Byron Sang. Byron Sang is with the Natural Resources Division here in the Atlanta Regional Office. He mostly works with hurricane recovery program, and but he has a lot of expertise with digital data collection, and he offered to provide a webinar to us on how to use Survey123 for ecological data collection. So Byron, with that, I think I can go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Brian. So thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to deliver this. Just quickly, if you can't hear me, I hope you can read the bottom of the screen, because I think we're mostly doing phone audio on this, but whatever. I haven't seen any problems, so hopefully this will work. And also apologies, I'm kind of getting over a cough, so if I accidentally cough into the microphone without catching the mute button, I hope it doesn't hurt your ears too much. But anyway, with that, so a little bit about me. Well, no, a little bit about this talk. I'm going to kind of do a quick and dirty introduction to what Survey123 is and why we like to use it and why I'm pitching it to you now. And then I'm going to try to sell you on it with regard to specific benefits to digital data collection and how it's in many ways better than paper. And then conversely, I'll try to address a lot of the concerns and resistances to adoption if you are still using paper and hard copies. And then the real kind of substance of this talk is actually going to be in the back half, where I really go through specific examples and applications for inventory and monitoring data and how to kind of suit Survey123's capacity to the work that you guys do. So my little introduction expanded a little bit why I'm here and feel like I can actually give this talk. So I am a wetland ecologist and a botanist by training, with a pretty extensive fieldwork background in things like vegetation inventory, restoration monitoring, soil sampling, wetland delineation, all that jazz. And in that experience, I've developed several Survey123 deployments specific to kind of long-term ongoing data collection efforts, in an effort to kind of streamline paperwork in my own job, but also try to make things easier for the teams that I've worked with before. More recently, I got to hang out with the Appalachian Highland guys on their cobble bar monitoring effort this fall, and got to see kind of how some of y'all's workflows work, which was really cool. They're actually already using Survey123 for that cobble bar protocol, and it was really cool to see kind of a lot of new tools that I hadn't seen, but also specifically how Survey123 integrates into their workflows. And I kind of saw that as an opportunity to pitch it to the rest of you guys. So as Brian mentioned, I am currently working on the hurricane recovery team, and so I'm doing that mostly, but I am available to borrow if you guys need some technical expertise. If you are interested in getting Survey123 set up, but you didn't have the capacity to do it yourselves, I might be able to lend some of my time to that. So that's me. So what is Survey123 and why does anybody care? So first and foremost, it's an Esri product and it's integrated in ArcGIS Online. It's actually one of their two main data collection apps, the other one being Collector, and it's kind of what they're pitching to the whole world as a replacement for paper forms. The other program, Collector, is kind of a replacement for ArcPad or TerraSync or what have you. But specifically, Survey123 is an all-digital mobile data platform. It still records all of its data directly into a geodatabase, but it's presented to the user as a fillable form. It's analogous to a paper sheet, and you can set it up to look and feel like the paper sheets that you already have. And then once you've filled those data sheets or filled those forms, your data becomes accessible online. And you could, for instance, develop new forms for new protocols also online or using their software, which is, so Survey123 is kind of the platform, and then Survey123 Connect there in the parentheses is the application that you use to develop new surveys. And then again, it's really all about digital, mobile, field-oriented data collection. So the field app is available for Android and iOS. It's also technically available on PC if you have a Windows laptop out there, but we would strongly recommend using mobile devices anyway. So why are we promoting it? Why do I care, and why do I want to see it used more? Well, first of all, it's very available too. It's available service-wide. So anyone at National Park Service or really at DOI with an Active Directory credential can log into the ArcGIS online system and start using Survey123 right now. Again, it's real time, it's multi-user, which is an interesting thing. So when you have a cell phone or a tablet that's connected to the network, you are submitting data as you record it, and you can have multiple people submitting data concurrently. But you don't have to be connected. So when you're not connected, the data can be stored in huge amounts of data. And we're talking hundreds, thousands of data sheets, depending on how complex your system is, basically until you run out of memory on your device. And then all of those can be linked up and synced onto the web server at any time. So, you don't have to work online. You can work really remote locations. You could be down in the bottom of a cave. You could be underwater, wherever you want. And then once you get back to civilization, you hit one button and boom, it's all online. And then for convenience sake, there's the link to download it yourself. So if you are interested, you can play with it today even. I'm actually just going to send the link out into chat, so everyone's little GoToMeeting widget should be able to hit that link now too. So if you do want to download it, in fact, actually, if you want to download it in the background now while I'm talking, we could even kind of step-by-step go through it yourselves. I'll show you guys how to log into it later. So digital data collection, why is it better than paper? I would say the very first and foremost biggest benefit is consistency and speed. And that's because you can do things like select one or select multiple tick lists, and you can engage mandatory responses. And what that does is it makes sure that the user in the field cannot submit their data without it being complete and uniform. That avoids data gaps, and that avoids the silly little things like, oops, I forgot to write this one condition of this one field report, and now we have to go back, or we just have to guess based on weather reports or something like that. The other side of that is data validation at time zero. So I know this is a big thing that the Appalachian Highlands guys really like, is that they can reference previous year's data right then and there and make sure that their answers now make sense. And if it doesn't make sense, the system will send up a red flag and tell you to fix it then while you're still on site. And hopefully that kind of really cleans up a lot of the common errors that you see in data. There's also an instant submission. So again, you have to be connected, but when you are on the network, your tablet doesn't really, like, it's not the bank of your data like a clipboard full of filled data sheets. Those filled data sheets are, that's the most precious item you have. That's the most expensive thing in terms of person hours that went into that filled sheet you have. With the tablet, as soon as you filled the sheet and you hit the little check mark, it submits. And now it's on the web, it's on the server, and even your data manager back in the office can see that data right then and there while you're moving on to the next site, or starting to connect the other things. So you don't have to worry about damaged forms or soggy paper or illegible handwriting. It's just there, and it's there in real time. As an added bonus, when you're out there in the field with a tablet, it's a tiny computer, and you can have all kinds of extra stuff there. So if you have manuals or field ID keys or SOPs or things that you don't really often reference frequently, but once in a while it would be awful nice to have, you can just have that as a PDF right there on the same device, so you don't have to have a backpack full of paperwork and books. I've used that a lot. I'll actually include kind of rapid keys for commonly confused species and stuff like that. And that allows me to, instead of putting in an unknown SPA field for a vegetation survey, I can key it out right then and there and answer that question before I leave the field. And then I don't have to take pictures and take vouchers and hope that I got all the right images and mourn the fact that I didn't take a picture of that one leaf junction or something. It's all there that you can use in that one device, which is the only thing you really have to take outside of your essential equipment and like a GPS rig. So there's also some less obvious benefits of data collection that have more to do with like the way the system is set up. So one concern that a lot of people have is data security. What happens if the system goes down? And I'm sure we all have our IT horror stories, but the reality is ArcGIS Online as a system is an enterprise-grade web service. It's actually, the last I checked, it was hosted on Amazon's servers. So, if Amazon goes down, yes, theoretically, your Survey123 data could go down, but it's not likely. And if it really does happen, that means the entire internet's on fire. So we'll probably have bigger concerns than trying to find some data seeds. If you have sensitive data, if you're, say, working with SEAC and you can't share any of your stuff online, you can also use Survey123 with the GIS Enterprise Portal, which is basically a clone of our GIS Online, but it's housed as a standalone server and it's housed behind the NPS firewall. So for all of the secure archaeological data out there and anything that we might end up having to make, that can be housed on the Enterprise Portal side of things. It works the exact same as the ArcGIS Online side. It's just behind our firewall. So I kind of mentioned this in lightly earlier, but the real-time multi-user access is a huge benefit that you just don't get from being a person with a clipboard. So it allows you to have multiple teams out at the same time, all submitting data into one big pile. So you can tell what the other folks have done, and you can have someone, say, with a laptop looking at the whole group of data and doing kind of on-the-fly QA checks, making sure that you didn't miss a site before you leave or stuff like that. So it's really good for progress tracking. It's really good for cross-comparing. You can see where all the other crews have collected their data all at the same time so that you can kind of get a whole forest picture instead of just looking at your slice at your site at that one time. Another added benefit to having online data is that it's a database and it can be integrated into other digital workflows. So your data processing and your report generation can be done on the fly as the data comes in. If you have an existing Access database that has a lot of statistical analysis plugins, let's say Ellen is your master statistical processor, but she's working remote, normally you'd probably wait for getting an entire season's worth of data in before you'd send it to her. Well, now you can work with her to script a single analysis program that will interface with the data as it comes in. You can actually set little triggers so that every time someone submits a survey, it reruns the analysis, and you can watch all of your data processing go through in real time, which is pretty sweet. You can also export that data directly from the GIS database to some other system. So if you have an existing database that's been built since the dawn of time and you've had 30 years of data loaded into it, you can always take new Survey123 data and port it directly into your existing database. No problems with that. And then for report exports, you can, homebrew your own version using your own database, which I'm sure a lot of folks do. But there is an ArcGIS Online, they call it a custom template report, and it's basically just a way to take the existing geodatabase data and export PDFs or Word document hard copies per record. So if you really, really need that paper hard copy and you're not willing to let go of physical storage on site in your office, you can print those off once you get back to the office and you've got a hard copy for archiving purposes. It's very easy to do and it's all part of the system. So concerns, obstacles to adoption. I've done my best to anticipate most of these, but I think at the end of this presentation, I'm going to open up and unmute everybody. And if you have other concerns or reluctances or reasons why you haven't embraced digital data collection to date, hopefully we'll be able to answer those too. So one big thing that we hear a lot is concerns about data loss or device failure. The common phrase I've heard is, well, paper sheets don't run out of batteries. And that is true, but pens break and rain makes paper soggy. But you can buy a rugged tablet for not a lot of money that is good for rain, it's good for snow, it's good for dropping, it's good for working under the water, and it's got an 11-hour battery life. So, that'll probably last you all day. And if it does die for some reason, let's say it's super duper hot and the battery's just getting killed in the sun, you can always plug that into a kind of mobile battery pack like you would use to charge your phone and get a few extra hours, or plug it in during lunch if you break for lunch or what have you. On top of that, you've got that instantaneous data submission. So, if you are worried about breaking or losing the device, just sync it every couple times back to the server. Use your mobile hotspot if you don't have connectivity, or use multiple tablets so that, if you lose one, you don't lose too much. And then print your paper copies to archive if you really, really need a backup. One thing that's worth noting is if the device crashes, every time you change an answer in a Survey123, every time you add data, it saves it locally. So even if the device just totally bombs, you can pull the memory out of that device and resuscitate it elsewhere if you absolutely had to. I've done that before. I've seen the device get run over, and the screen was completely just garbage. You couldn't log into it, you couldn't interface with it, but I plugged it into a computer, it booted as a thumb drive, and as I was able to harvest the data off of that drive and reconstitute it. It is kind of clunky, but it's a lot better than just not having it at all. Another concern that I've heard is costs to implement. So yes, it does cost something. There is a one-time cost to spend the time to develop and test that form. But there's a lot of people who are very good with Survey123 already. I know several of the teams in the INM network already use Survey123. I'm sure they could help. I could help. And it's not nearly as difficult as it seems often. There's a lot of information online that can really guide even a brand new user into making a relatively robust and functional survey. And then of course there's the device purchase. So I'm a big fan of the Samsung 8-inch tablet or 7-inch tablet, and it's fully rugged. It's got an all-day battery, and the thing is like $400, which really that's not an insane amount of money for a handheld computer. If you buy a lot of them, they're even cheaper, but do you really need a lot of them? And then if you really just can't afford the tablets, you can always use devices that you already have. This software works on every Android and iOS smartphone out there. So, if you already have a digital phone, or if you already have a smartphone that NPS issued you, just use that, and then you don't have to buy anything. And I would say, acknowledging those initial startup costs, compare them to the labor costs of never-ending data entry, always having to go back to the office and manually transcribe your handwritten data sheets. Think about your lost time due to transcription errors or due to data omissions. Think about the lost time and staff hours to repeat site visits if you really have to go back and answer a question. It's just that's a component that you don't have to deal with Survey123 because the data is already digital and it's already on a database the second you record it. Some other things. So adverse field conditions. That is one component where you really have to choose your hardware to suit your conditions. If you are in a volcano for some reason, I know the Southeast region doesn't have that many of them, but let's say we were all in Hawaii and we're at Volcanoes National Park. You would have to choose the appropriate hardware or the appropriate kind of housing to protect that hardware. But my counter question would be, well, what are you using for digital cameras and GPS rigs now? Because those are obviously capable of handling whatever your field conditions are. If you have something that protects those pieces of equipment, what would you be able to use for a tablet or a smartphone? And I would also say in terms of like, well, what about rain and inclement weather? A lot of these field rugged tablets have things like glove mode or wet screen mode that are really, really good in those conditions, using a digital stylus instead of detecting raindrops. And that's, I would say that those benefits gained outweigh the benefits lost to having to have a computer with you. And then finally, aversion to change. If you really just don't like the digital world, I can't really say anything about that. But I would say that you probably already do use a smartphone and a laptop. wouldn't it be nice to have all your data in that same system that you're using to do analysis and do long-term data archiving already? And then I would also say your field crews are probably already using smartphones and smart devices all the time. So I'm sure they would appreciate not having to carry books and paperwork and what have you as well. So that's my elevator pitch. I hope I've sold it on you. If I haven't, well, that's okay. But I'm actually going to switch gears now and go through kind of a walkthrough of demonstrating Survey123 in the wild. So again, if you haven't downloaded it already, go ahead and do so. If you have downloaded it but weren't successful at logging in, this little splash screen should get you there. The first thing you need to do is open the app. If you haven't gotten to this little login screen, hit the gear and hit sign in. And then there's like a second row that says enterprise login, and that's where you type NPS, just the 3 letters, and that will bring you to the DOI National Park Service login system. That second screen, you just hit NPS. If you're on your computer or connected to the network at work, it should just go straight through. If not, you'll get this like DOI splash screen to log in, and that's where you use your Active Directory credentials. That's usually first initial and last name, though there's often variations. Sometimes there's a number. So it's not your email address where it's full name _ last name. It's just initial last name at nps.gov. You do need the at nps.gov portion. That's your domain. And then you key in your password. It's not your chip card PIN, it's your actual password. So whenever you changed your password last, it should be that. So once you're logged in, you'll go to the top right, the 3 bars, and that will pull out a side menu and you can download surveys. And the thing I'm about to show you is called S123 Ecology Demo. I just updated it, so it's only a couple days old. It should be towards the top of the list if you want to scroll down. But if you just type S123, it'll pretty much be the only thing on the list. Hit the little down arrow cloud to download it from ArcGIS online, and then you should be good to go. So let me switch here, pause, and go, screen, there it is. Okay, so what you see here is, this is not technically Survey123, this is Survey123 Connect, which is the software that I used to write this survey. And I'm really only using it because it shows you a fake tablet, and so it's kind of a pretend way to experience what it would look like in the field. But you are welcome to just load this same survey on your actual devices and follow along as you will. It should look very similar. If you're on a smaller phone, it'll be a little narrow, so you might have to scroll down. So one of the first things that I wanted to highlight about Survey123 is that because it's spatial data, because it's integrated with GIS, every form has spatial geometry associated with it. At a minimum, you have an XY point. But Survey123 is actually capable of recording any kind of geometry via point, line, polygon, or whatever. So, in here, I've got 3 different types of geometry. Normally, that's not how it works. I've kind of cheated a little bit. So you typically aren't able to have multiple types of geometry perform. I've hidden these in what are called repeats. It's not worth going into to allow me to do multiple ones. But for instance, for points, you can just have it collect a point. So I can collect a map I'm here in Atlanta, but if I actually wanted it to be over there, I could. And then you've got a point. And you can actually chain multiple points together to create geometry. So I collected 2 points. That would constitute a short line segment. I could also just collect a line in person. Let me see, it's a little bit slow on the response. There we go. So I can manually just click a line on the map, or I can use an integrated GPS. Of course, my laptop's not moving, so it's not going to collect any useful data. But if I was out in the field, I could just collect this polyline by chaining vertices, and that would be the geometry that would be associated with this record. And I can hit check and close that out, and now it's got a 1.1 mile line sequence stored in there. Same thing with polygons. not very complicated. I could collect GPS points, or I can manually click right there on the map. If I hit yes, now it should go through and see if it saves. So there you go. So now I have a 120-ish acre polygon with a perimeter of 1.7 miles. And all of that spatial data can be recalled as calculations. So if I need the length of that for a calculation downstream in my form, I can just pull it straight out. If I need the precision for a verification, for instance, if you want to limit all of your geo data points to, a certain precision threshold, you can pull that data out of the geometry and run internal checks and balances on that. So that's an overview of points, lines, and polygons. Another key factor that I mentioned was autocomplete pick lists. And there's two different styles and ways you can do that. This is just the short tree list, basically. But let's say I wanted to find an oak, type in oak, and let's say it's a white oak. So that's a quick way to limit the diversity of syntax. So instead of everyone writing white oak and that one plant nerd like me saying Quercus alba, you can have it as a fixed text input, and everybody's response has to be the same. The other nice thing about this pick list is there's a photo. So right there on the left, you see that little thumbnail. If I click it, it opens an actual photograph of the leaf, for instance. And you can associate that with any of your multiple choice answers, which is a really good way of doing a quick and dirty on the fly verification of your ID. So, I'm not saying that that's super diagnostic, but as a quick hint, it's better than nothing. Another way to do quick pick list is using a second question to pre-filter your options. So just below in tree category, if I click the oak button, it will give me all of the different things that are classified as oak. If it's not an oak, I can go to non-oak deciduous or even evergreen, and it will give me similar filtered list options. And then if I had an eastern red cedar, I can click that photo, verify that in fact it is what I have in the field, and then I've made my selection. So that's a good way to ensure consistency and weed out nonsense answers that just aren't inserted correctly, or do things like, if half of your users are using scientific names and half of your users are using common names, this is a way to standardize all the responses in a single survey. The other nice thing is that you can use these standardized responses with like a lookup table to pull out other things. So like you could pull a protected status, or you could pull a recommended, like if this was a list of invasives, you could pull a recommended herbicide or something like that. So there's a lot of ways to use these pick lists to process further down the stream. Excuse me. So another thing you can do is on-the-fly calculations. This is good for internal data QA/QC checks, but it's also just good to save your users from having to do math in the field. So this is just a straight additive substrate thing. It's a scrolling thing from 0 to 100, and you see once the total sum of all the different classes of substrates equals 100, that little red arrow down at the bottom disappears, and it says total substrate 100. So if I say make bedrock 25, cobble 25, I've got 50%, and then I go from gravel 50, total substrate is 100, good to go. So that's just, it's done every time I pull that slider in one direction or another, it automatically updates the math. You'll notice at the bottom there's an other substrate class. So there's another thing that I did. So if I make other substrate anything over 0, it asks me for other substrate, and it's a mandatory field. So required if other is greater than 0. And then I can say, well, I have 50% dogs in my string. And then now it's cleared the total substrate equals 100, so long as I have that class. So that's another way to kind of do internal calculations to make sure that your users are inputting the data the way it's supposed to be input and not cutting corners or not failing to insert a field or something. Let's see. Graphic questions. So this is a system that they've kind of integrated where you can use images for all kinds of things. So there's a little soil texture triangle, and if I've got loam, I can click the loam polygon, and you notice up on the left it says selected loam. So it's just kind of a way to use a formatted image as your pull-down list in lieu of a text-based field. You can also do select multiple. So this is just something I pulled off the internet. Let's say I have right front quarter damage to the vehicle. I can click the quarter panel, the door, and the window, and there it says selected quarter panel, window, and door. So, you can have a select one or a select multiple. You can also go super low tech and just include an image for an ID key just as a reference. So this is just pick a toad. There's only 3 selections. It's American toad, Fowler's, or Southern toad. But I've got an image to the right, which allows me to do a quick check to make sure I got the right toad. And you could have that, for instance, only appear if you select a less common species, or only appear if you select one of a few easily mistaken species, or what have you. Whatever you need, that's a quick and easy option. You'll also notice this is side by side. There are a lot of really malleable formatting options. So you could have 5 questions all in one row. You could have them stacked up in a grid, however you need. So that's an example of what using photos in the survey looks like. So here's another one. So it handles images really elegantly. You can take a photo with the device, embed it directly into that survey response, and then it gets uploaded along with the survey as an attachment in your database. Now, obviously, my laptop doesn't have a camera system ready to go. So let's see, I'll do some fake. I'm actually loading these from a folder, but it's the exact same as if I had taken that photo myself using a camera on a smartphone. And in fact, if you have a smartphone and you've taken half a dozen photos right when you arrived on site, you can also use the same folder icon to load previously taken shots directly into the system from the photo library or the gallery or what have you, depending on your thing. And the nice thing about these images is if you need to, you can rename them. You can also batch export them after the fact. So once you've, say, collected 3 dozen records for the day, you go back to the office, you can run a little tool. Excuse me, you can run a little tool that will extract all of those images and then rename them something useful. So, you can say record XYZ, site, blah, 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 photo 1. And that allows you to collect your records and your photos all on one device, all at the same time, without then having to go back to the office and do, find the photo and rename everything and just spend a lot of time doing data cleanup, because it's already done for you, because these photos know what record they're attached to, and as a result, they can be associated with those different fields and responses. Another thing you can do with photos, which I didn't show a demonstration of here, is there are devices that integrate photographic recording with things like spatial measurements. So you can take a photo of a wall, or take a photo really in the field. If you bring like a plastic rectangle with you, you can align the photo to that rectangle, and then it's spatially aware, and then you can do measurements. So you can say, here's a picture of a tree with a rectangle leaning against it, and now I know that the tree's height is 20 meters. Or here's a picture of a window, and I know that that window's area is now, however many square feet. So there's lots of little interesting ways you can integrate photos beyond just recording one. And then finally, this is an example of kind of deeper calculations and how the computer-based system is able to give you value added that you really wouldn't have on a paper form without just having to sit there with a calculator and do math. So this is actually a simplified excerpt of the U.S. Army Corps wetland delineation form for hydrophytic vegetation. I scrubbed out a bunch of extra stuff and really streamlined it, but it's the same kind of calculation. So wetland delineation vegetation calculations are based on cover classes and wetland indicator statuses, which are pulled from a table. And all of that is based on, in the field, identifying a species and giving it a cover class. So let's say I'm in a woodland site. I'm going to say for tree, my dominant tree species is sweet gum. That's liquid ambar, Cerasifolia. Cover is 50. I'm just going to walk through this real quick. And I'm just making up data so that we can see how the calculations work. There's a lot of internal checks and balances in here. Like for instance, the dominance calculations are based on the order of the dominance. So if my third species, let's do a Quercus nigra water oak. If I accidentally write 50 in here, it's going to send me an error. See, rank order, species cover not in descending order. Well, that's because I'm dumb and it's not 50%, it's 10%. Now it takes. So total cover 85, 50% of that is 42.5, and those are used in calculations later. Let's throw in a couple shrubs just for kicks. Let's say a tag alder. Say there's a ton of it for no reason. Here's another example of a internal check. Let's say I only have 1% here. So that's another error that comes up. That's because the Army Corps doesn't let you record anything less than 5% because they don't consider it a significant contributor. So if it's only one shrub and I still feel like it's occupying a significant portion of the site, I'll just call it 5%. It accepts. Let's grab an herb for kicks. And then I'll show you the real magic, which is down at the bottom. So all I did was input species and cover classes. And now I have all of the calculations determining whether or not this site would qualify as having hydrophytic vegetation. I haven't had to do any cover class calculations. And the obligate, facultative, upland, fac-wet calls, all of that was pulled from a data table that I have embedded behind the scenes in this form. So you'll notice up here, I wish I could highlight it for you, but Rubus argutus in herb 1, 25% cover, facultative up, yes, it's dominant. Facultative up came from the table that works behind the scenes. I didn't have to put that in there. It just knew that that species for this area is fac up. And then whether or not it was a dominant had to do with its percent cover and all of its other stuff. Likewise, down below, I've got a running total of the number of dominants, 4, a running total of how many of those dominants are obligate or facultative wet, only 1, so I did not pass the so-called rapid test. But then my dominance test, which is are 50% or more of the dominant species obligate, fac wet, or fac, yes, because I have 4 dominants, 3 are fac wet or fac, and 75% of those, so it passes the test. All of this math was done on the fly. Every single time I enter a new species and a new cover class, it immediately updates that math. So that's a really cool thing that would normally be skipped in the field or done while everyone's sitting and doing lunch. But instead, you don't even have to think about it. It's immediately done right then and there. And you can say, hey, look, this site does pass the tests for hydrophytic vegetation. I do have wetland vegetation at this site. Good. And now I don't have to worry about doing all that calculation after the fact to clean up my data sheets. My data sheets are finished and they've already been submitted to the web. So that's really all the explanation I have now. I did want to show you real quick what it looks like to actually make one of these. So just for kicks, I'm going to swap over to the Excel sheet that made this sheet, yes, the Excel sheet that made this survey. So let me zoom that in so that you guys can see it a little better. So it does look like a bunch of text goop because frankly it is, but it's really no different than writing a database query or doing a little HTML. In fact, actually, you can see in this field there, when I make those red alerts, they are literally HTML tags. So anybody with a modest amount of computer know-how can write one of these really from scratch. And anyone who doesn't have that know-how can pick it up very, very easily. The entire system is just built off of an Excel sheet. I mean, that's it. And as long as you get your formulas correct, it'll work. It's nice because just like I showed you, the software that you use to make the survey also shows you an example of the survey, so you can kind of do the testing in real time and make sure that you got your formulas working the way you need them to. So yeah, I guess that's it from me. I'll go ahead and close that and swap back over to Survey123. But I'm going to unmute everybody. Does anyone have any questions? I see from chat, Ellen asked, with autocomplete lists, is there an option for a user in the field to add a species that is not on the list? Yes and no. So you cannot add to the pick list itself without going back to the computer and updating the list. But one thing that I've frequently done is I will have an other in there, and then that'll be like the last pick on the option list. And then if I select other, I will have a contextual question that says, okay, you said other, tell me what you think it is. And maybe you can have like a mandatory extra photo that you bring in, so you have to grab a voucher photo of your other along with your best guess species ID. And then you can go back after the fact and fix it later. So it's not super flexible because, for instance, that other species would not have been on the calculation table that pulls up the wetland indicator status. So you wouldn't have any of those like calculations based on outside data available to pull in. But if you just want to add a quick species or add a different response, that's the same mechanic as when I stream cover class for other percent became greater than 0. It asked you what that other was, that kind of thing. And that's worked out pretty well for me. Any other questions from folks? You can type them in the chat or you can just blurt them out. Everyone's unmuted. Nope. Okay. Well,
Byron, I guess, Byron,
yeah, go ahead.
Brian. I noticed I downloaded my copy of the demo maybe several days ago, and I noticed there were a couple of differences. And so, does the survey itself have to be manually updated from the device, or does it send something?
The survey does have to be manually updated on the device. I'll show you. Let me open up Survey123 real quick and show you how that works. It's loading now. I'll share it over with you. Let's see, Survey123 for ArcGIS. So this is my Survey123. Let me embiggen it a little bit. So Survey123 ecology demo. If I click that, this is where I could start collecting right now. But if I want to update it, I can. Oh no, I lied. So not that menu. You go back to the main menu and you go to download surveys. And then you can refresh the Survey123 ecology demo. So you notice at the very top right there, instead of the download cloud icon, it's the little swirly recycle icon. If I click that, it automatically updates. It says ecology survey download completed. That was a fresh copy downloaded right off the server, and it should incorporate any changes that I've made between the last time I uploaded it and now. So it's pretty easy. You can also go in and delete them. So you can do all kinds of good stuff with these. If you have too many surveys that you don't want, you can just drop them. They don't really take up much space on your device, so I've had dozens, plural, of surveys loaded at once, and it just doesn't matter. But you do need to refresh them every time manually. So for instance, if you are actively modifying your survey, you should send out an email to your field crews saying, hey, open up all your devices and refresh the survey. I just made some changes. That's pretty easy. That's no different than, for instance, refreshing base maps in a GIS or a GPS device or what have you.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, so there's another question that came in. There's a few. Let me get to them. Okay, SFCN. I have a question. Is it possible to collect multiple coordinates for an entry? Yes and no. So again, in Survey123, you can set up multiple points in a repeat. So you collect a point, go somewhere else, take another point, go somewhere else, take a third point, et cetera, et cetera. You can chain as many of those as you want together. And then you can go out of that repeat and do calculations to link those individual points to a polyline or a polygon. What you cannot do is have the base survey be associated with more than one feature in the database, which means if the database is built around point data, then it's one form, one point. If it's based around line data, then it's one form, one line, et cetera. You can add other geometries in repeats elsewhere in the survey, but the core feature with which that one record is associated can only be a single geometry entity. So yes and no is your answer. Let's see, Lisa said, can you compare Survey123 Collector and Quick Capture? Pros, cons, would you use one over the other? So I can't speak a whole lot to Quick Capture. I haven't used it myself. I've played with it, and my understanding is that it's for very simple but very fast data collection. So let's say you want a hot button that says record a, like let's say you're driving down the road or biking down the road and you're taking an inventory of fire hydrants. You can set up Quick Capture for a single button. So every time you click it, it drops a pin on your location and says there's a fire hydrant here. But it doesn't let you make a bunch of decisions about, well, is it a red or a blue or a green fire hydrant? Does it belong to the city? Does it belong to the county? That's not really an appropriate use for Quick Capture. Quick Capture is a single button. You click it, it records, you move on. Survey123 and Collector are both quite a bit more robust and both work in very different ways, but can work on the same data. So Survey123 is one record to one geometry. Collector is more like ArcPad, where you can go in and you can record a line, and you can record a polygon, and you record a couple points. You can take a photo and attach it to one of your records. So Collector is more map-centric. You are given a view of the world with your location, and you can record geometry as you move around in space. You can also manually draw it in the world, but it's really intended for you to be collecting GIS data in the field as you would if you had a Trimble unit. Survey123, while it does still record geometry, is more like a paper form. So that would be more like you have a clipboard with 3 pages of paper form, you're answering complex questions, you're maybe doing some math based on your responses, and then while you're there, you collect a point. You can actually set them both up to work on the same database. That's kind of more of a advanced power user option, but I have done it. So I use a lot of single points in space, excuse me. Sorry, I just tried to mute a cough, but it didn't work. Single points in space for field notes. So what I'll do is I'll be on a hurricane project site visit, and I want to record an XY point in space and then take a couple pictures and write some notes. I have a Survey123 form that does that for me, but I also have a collector map that records points to the same geodatabase. All of it's hosted online. It can be done. It's a little more complicated, but if it is something that you really want to do, I can let you know. But as far as pros and cons over Survey123 versus Collector, it really depends on what your workflow looks like. If you're answering a lot of questions and taking relatively little spatial data, as if you would a paper form, then Survey123 all the way. If you're answering relatively fewer questions and maybe taking more complex geometry, then Collector. If you absolutely must see a map because where you are in the world and what you're doing is important in terms of relation to other features that are already in the world, then definitely Collector, because you can do things like load reference data, so you have trails and buildings and survey units on a map in Collector. That's not really an option in Survey123. I hope that answered your question. Ellen asked, if several networks have similar vegetation data sets, it seems like it's pretty easy to make one survey in Excel and then copy that Excel and make the minor changes necessary for another network. Totally. I've actually done that for the Army Corps wetland delineation thing. We had one for different states. So we actually had 3 for Georgia. We had like a Eastern Piedmont version of Georgia, a coastal plain version of Georgia, and then like an actually on the coast salt marsh version for Georgia. So, it's the exact same form, exact same questions, but the options in your pick lists change because the types of species that grow at specific sites change. That's very easy to do, and really the only work is developing it the first time, and then once you know that the Excel sheet and the survey works correctly, you can swap out your pick lists very easily just by copy pasting. Lisa asks, how is data saved? Can you choose if you want the data saved as a shapefile, geodatabase, etc.? You can't really choose at the outset. So the data is saved directly onto a feature service in ArcGIS Online, which is an internet version of a geodatabase. Now, once you have that data, at any point, you can export it to either a shapefile or a geodatabase, or even like as a CSV and a printed map. But the live copy of the data to which new records are sent in real time, is all housed online as a feature service, which is an internet thing. Michael Parrish, if you have a volunteer without NPS device, can they install Survey123 on a personal device? They can install the app. It's free to install on the App Store. They may not be able to log in to retrieve that survey. If you don't have an active directory credential on DOI, then you're not going to be able to get in to retrieve that survey, unfortunately. Basically, it's an internet permissions thing. They wouldn't be able to submit data to our AGOL account. It's just not an option. So your best bet there would really be to have a field tablet that you log into. And then technically they would be logged into your account. Maybe you want to set up a network account that has kind of only barely permissions to get onto AGOL. I know that the region does that. Chris Barrow, the GIS program guy, he has an account that's just for the Southeast Regional GIS management, and that account has been logged into a bunch of devices. So I'm sure IT could set that up for you. I don't know how that works, but yeah, a volunteer, just some random person on the street without Active Directory credentials would not be able to submit data to our database. Steve, almost every electronic device I've used in the field has failed to work at some point. So I'm learning to bring backup devices. Rather than bringing a backup mobile device, is bringing paper forms or pencils a viable option? Sure, if you want. I know just this last season, the cobble bar monitoring folks at Appalachian Highlands were taking both paper and digital concurrently. The first day, I think they were taking both on top of each other. So one person was running the tablet while the other person was recording on paper. By the time I left, they were trusting digital devices exclusively. Up to you. It's really what you want. Remember that, of course, if you record on paper, you're going to have to transcribe those eventually. You could always take your paper forms and manually enter them on your backup tablet when you get back to the hotel if you're on travel or whatever, which is better than waiting till you get back to the office. But in my opinion, I would trust the device to work, but always have a backup device accessible, if not with you. You know, another nice thing about having multiple crews is if you have 3 crews running 3 tablets at once and one crew's tablet goes offline, you still have 2 crews and 2 tablets. That's not a benefit over paper. You could have a dozen people with a dozen clipboards with paper. It's really up to you what you want to do. You know, yeah, you're right. Eventually something can go wrong with an electronic device. But let's be honest, eventually someone's pencil will break, or a pen will run out of ink, or a compass will break and stop working. So, you know, I mean, field equipment is field equipment. It does get abused and it does stop working eventually. And that's just something that you have to compensate for with redundancy. Okay, well, that's the end of the chat questions. Anyone else have anything else?
Thank you, Byron. I really appreciate you taking the time to give this webinar for us. I think if there are networks who would like to pursue this further, please let me know. And we can, I think that Byron had initially mentioned that there's a possibility of kind of doing a workshop to kind of go more diving in with the people who might be developing Survey123 apps. So we can try and set that up if folks would like to do that. So please just let us know, and we'll take it from there. Thanks everyone for joining in today, and thanks again, Byron, for the presentation.
Yep, thank you guys for listening to me for an hour.
Have a great weekend. Thanks everyone.